We'll be starting now since we have a few people who will become a few stragglers. So I'd love to welcome you to why is St. Louis a great place to start a company? I remember starting my first company at 22. I was still in engineering school. And I've never worked for anyone else ever since then. Mainly because I'm a control freak and they'll fire me after 2 days. But however, as a consultant, they'll take the abuse. So there are some amazing things that are happening in this community the last 5 to 10 years. There's resources that we never had when I was a young person. And I think a lot of the people who have started companies many years ago feel the same way. It's a real blessing, the amount of talent and energy that goes into helping other people achieve their dreams. So I would love to introduce you to one of my favorite people who's been an unbelievable asset to the community and a great friend with MVF, Travis Sheridan. Travis heads up the Venture Cafe Foundation, which is based out of CIC in the Cortex Center. 4240 Duncan, I believe, is the address. Then we have next to, wait a minute, you're out of order. Everybody move. I can't do intros. Next I have Ginger, and I've actually done some coaching pre-competition with Ginger at Arch Grants. It's an amazing experience, the things that they're doing down at Arch Grants to help entrepreneurs get started with some seed money and education. They've helped prepare people on, how do I actually connect with the people who are investing and make a tight pitch? And they've done a marvelous job. Next we have Phyllis from Cortex. Phyllis is, also, you will see her at every function, and her whole area, everything that they've done at Cortex is just, you've been in that area, is just mind-boggling. And then the things that are on the drawing board, and the things that are actually, shovel-ready, and the things that are already in construction. And I'm sure she's going to be able to share some of that with us. Next we have Mark Dink from St. Louis Economic Development Partnership. This is part of the one of the people who can help. Our local community, the cities, the state, the counties, we're doing everything we can to create jobs. And the people who create the jobs typically are small businesses. And so if we can help jumpstart small businesses, we can increase jobs, and we can start making this an unbelievable community. Well, once wrong, we are already an unbelievable community, but let's try to make it a little bit better. And last we have Patty Hagan from T-Rex, which is also one of the companies or organizations that's sole purpose is to help entrepreneurs and start getting that education process. So I do not want to take up a lot of time because we have a ton of material to cover. Travis, can you lead us off, what?
Sure. Thank you all for being here. It's great to be in the Danforth Plant Science Center. Again, this is one of the great resources we have in this community, and I'm joined on stage with 4 people that I not only get to work with on a regular basis throughout the community, I consider them all friends. And you'll see why as they share their stories and their heart and the resources that are available in St. Louis. They all have a heart and a motivation to help startups. But one of the things I notice about St. Louis, I've only been here about 4.5 years now, is that it's a fabric, a tapestry of resources that all are on like sewn with one thread. And all too often, you get dropped into the middle of that, and you don't know where the beginning or the end is. And you want to get to a certain point, you want to access a certain piece of it, but there's just so much. I think we work from a place of abundance and not necessarily scarcity, and sometimes that position of abundance can become overwhelming. And so a lot of the stuff we'll talk about today is how those individual pieces of the tapestry fit together, and how really outside of a perspective of competition, but truly with a lens of collaboration, how the different resources in St. Louis can all work together to help you move your venture forward. Tom did a brief introduction of each of the organizations, but I'm going to ask my panelists here to tell us a little bit about your organization and what part of the tapestry you particularly are in.
So Arch Grants is a nonprofit founded in 2012, and we host a global startup competition that is now year-round, and we announce Arch Grants recipients twice a year. Initially, it was just once a year, but in 2015, we switched to this year-round model. So Last year, we announced 21 Arch Grants recipients, and through the end of 2015, we had funded 76 startups since 2012 and invested a total of $4.2 million in those startups to incent them to either stay in St. Louis or come to St. Louis. And ultimately, of those 76 companies, 71 remain in business, and of the 71 still in business, 89% are still in St. Louis.
Phyllis?
Wow, it's a lot of statistics. I'm Phyllis Ellison with the Cortex Innovation District. We are not just one building. A lot of you know the at 4240 building that was referenced, where we hold Venture Cafe. We are part of we are a 200-acre district that is bordered by WashU's Med Campus and includes IKEA. Yes, it was intentional that IKEA was put there. And we're creating a live, work, play, learn environment that can be on 24/7. It's not just a bio district as a place to go to work and leave at 5 o'clock or 3 o'clock, but it's really an environment that allows a place to work, a place to play and socialize and get to know each other, and a place to continually learn. And so there's so much programming that goes on with the district as well. We currently have about 250 companies. I'd say probably over 200 of those would be in the smaller startup range. But we also have major corporations like Boeing and DuPont and AB Mauri in the space as well, and Square. We work with a model of bringing in innovation centers that supply you with the programming and the connectivity that you're looking for. So items like Venture Cafe, our newest one will be Tech Shop, opening in August. Center for Emerging Technologies, you just heard from Christy on the last panel, and Square One, Biogenerator and their mentoring program. All those come together as pieces of the district and different ways that we can support you.
All right, my name is Mark Dank. I'm with the St. Louis Venture Works and St. Louis Economic Development Partnership. We're actually a government organization that is actually a joint venture between St. Louis City and St. Louis County. We actually have 5 locations around the St. Louis area. We have one right across the street, down the street from here, called Helix Center, which is an agriculture and biotechnology center. We have one in West County, which is kind of a more professional services. That's kind of located in the Chesterfield Valley area. We have one in South County that is more focused on retail businesses. Then we have one in Grand Center, which has kind of healthcare and food incubator. And then we have a final one that's up in Wellston that is kind of more industrial and manufacturing construction in that sense of things. We're actually doubling that size on July 6th. We're doing a groundbreaking to double the size of that incubator itself. In addition to the 5 incubators itself, most of our companies are all early stage startups. So a lot of people that come in, they're usually 1, 2 people actually starting the company itself, and we work with them to grow their businesses until a point that either we feel that they're ready to graduate, or it's time for them. They feel it's time that they need to move on because they need to expand their own businesses. In addition to the incubators, the VentureWorks incubators we run, we also have a St. Louis Startup Challenge that we will be the 2016. It's $120,000 cash, basically a cash award. That will be launching again this year. It's June 23rd, Thursday, June 23rd, over at the Venture Cafe. If you're interested in learning more about that, it's a business plan competition. And then in November, we're doing an export competition, and that will be launching. We'll be launching that information and more about the export plan competition at WashU on Tuesday, June 28th. Both those competitions are available at the STL Partnership website, or also World Trade Center /stl.com.
Okay, Patty?
Hi, I'm Patty Hagan, and I'm from T-Rex. And T-Rex is a technology business incubator located in downtown St. Louis. We were founded by the St. Louis Regional Chamber, Downtown STL, the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership, and the St. Louis Development Corporation. So the city and county came together in addition to the Regional Chamber to found T-Rex. We were founded in 2011, and we got our name from our first home in the Railway Exchange building in downtown St. Louis, and so technology and the Railway Exchange became T-Rex. And then we moved a couple years ago into the historic Lambert building, which is on Washington Avenue in downtown St. Louis. And when we moved, we had about 80 companies that moved from the Railway Exchange, including Arch Grants. Arch Grants started with us at about the same time. Moved with us from the Railway Exchange building into the Lambert building downtown, this building on Washington Avenue. We now have 169 businesses incubating and providing support to the companies that have offices. Startup companies have offices in our building. In addition to that, we have co-working space, and we also house the accelerators Prosper, Stadia, 630, and the venture capital firm Cultivation Capital. We also run a conference center on our 5th floor. If you haven't been, you should come visit. It's like a little town square for the tech ecosystem in St. Louis. Most of our companies are focused on technology-related developments, although we have a few other kinds of companies sprinkled amongst us, including the Fashion Incubator. So the Fashion Incubator is actually incubating with us right now. But their plan is to move down Washington Avenue, so we'll bookend Washington Avenue with the Fashion Incubator and T-Rex.
So a couple of you mentioned physical spaces, whether it be VentureWorks or T-Rex or even within Cortex, there's physical spaces. So many entrepreneurs start off working off their kitchen table, hold their meetings at a local coffee house or a bread company, if you will. And there's a limit to the level of professionalism they can have if they're bouncing around. How important is it for a company to get involved in a space that's right for them? And does that involve long-term leases or anything like that? It's a leading question because I know the answer to it, but they don't. So as people are trying to become more professional with their venture, how important is it to get plugged into the right space? And I'll let anybody want to answer that.
I'll say it's incredibly important. I think each of our co-working spaces, and I'll just lump them all as co-working spaces, but there are so many different flavors and personalities to the spaces that are available in St. Louis. 5 years ago, none of them existed, and today, the partnership ones
thank
did.
you.
I like. There are a lot more today, but we're fortunate to have T-Rex, CIC, and CET in the Cortex District, Tech Artista, Nebula. I'm going to miss several, I'm sure, but there are so many different flavors and personalities, and most of them you can probably get into as co-working, where you come in and take whatever desk is available for that day. You can probably get in for $150 a month, $200 a month, and that gives you a great 125.
She's 50.
Lower.
50?
$50 a
50,
month
there we
at
go.
T-Rex.
And at different price points, so you can find what's comfortable for you. But that gives you a chance to build a peer network of support around you, of other people that are going through the same thing that you are. And like I said, there are so many different cultures that you can step into and find your people, find people that are doing the same things that you are.
St. Louis VentureWorks has that kind of a similar approach with we call it more hotelian aspect of it. It's an affiliate program. It's $100 a month, but it's up to 6 months contract every time you renew. But with the 5 centers around St. Louis, you can actually pick up and kind of move from center to center, depending on where your client base is, or if you're looking to get more clients, or whatever else it might be. But you could easily come in, grab a desk, grab a conference room. It's very easy to book them ahead of time, but you can do it up to 32 hours a month.
We all have different models. And so, in terms of advice for finding a space, I think back, to Phyllis's point, you have to find a place that fits what kind of business you're starting and where you want to connect. I mean, density is so important in these kinds of endeavors. And when you have a dense environment of entrepreneurs and funding organizations, support organizations like Arch Grants, Venture Cafe, I-10. When you have that kind of an environment, you're one introduction away or just an elevator ride away from making a connection. What we see a lot of in terms of density at T-Rex is some companies that may not be doing so well will reform with someone else. So these relationships lead to business opportunities as well as new ideas and new innovations that can help these businesses. We have, At T-Rex, we have, again, this co-working space, but we also have office space. But I would say, surprisingly, and this surprised us, is the use of this conference center and space where people, it really is like a town square kind of a thing. And that's where people get coffee next to each other and so forth. And so it's different than working at home. There's certainly a lot of our entrepreneurs will work at home a couple of days and then come in to maybe use the co-working space, but they just want to get that energy and make those connections that can help their businesses as they grow.
Yeah, go ahead.
As a follow-up to that, depending on which co-working space you're looking at, they are different lease terms. So some of them are month to month, like CIC, which is in the Cortex district. Others will be at 6 months. Some have space that are more traditional long-term leases at 2 to 5 years. So depending on where you are and how certain or uncertain your growth might be, that flexibility or that stability might be important to you.
And one of the things that I think Cliff mentioned in the last panel is not to look for the one that's just in close proximity to your home, but to be in the space that has like-minded individuals. Mark mentioned the Helix Center, which is right around the corner here. It's a biotech and ag tech focused incubator. If you are in that sort of industry, you probably want to be in that space because you could roam the halls and ask questions of folks. And that leads me to a word that you mentioned, Patty, density. Getting all these smart people in the same room. How important is it, and Ginger, you bring a cohort of people in a few times a year that are all starting ventures at the exact same time in St. Louis. What are some of the benefits that you've noticed for any of you that want to answer this, in the importance of density, and any examples of where you've seen entrepreneurs move faster because they've been in the right place at the right time?
Ginger, you?
So it's a timely question because we're welcoming our first cohort today. I just left them, yes.
Not your first cohort ever?
No, just 2016. And I think to Patty and Phyllis's point, and certainly why Travis is asking this question, you know oftentimes whether or not something's the right fit, not just by what you see, but how you feel. And so much of that has to do with density. Are there faces that are familiar to you and make you feel comfortable? And to Travis's point about industry clusters, are there enough peers in the space that interest you to feel as though there's density relative to expertise and market in conversation, so to speak? And I think for our cohorts, that's very important. We require Arch Grants recipients to maintain a membership to a co-working space in the city of St. Louis for the 12 months that we fund them. And the vast majority choose T-Rex, and still others choose CIC. And we're very pleased to see that. Industrious, Nebula, some of these other co-working spaces are also very attractive to some of our entrepreneurs. But to Travis's point about like the Helix Center and the work that the Economic Development Partnership has done in partnership with others to ensure that the Helix Center is an attractive and viable place because of not only its industry clusters, but its density. The Helix Center is a great example of a perfect spot for a number of our bio companies. So the density piece is huge, and shared experience through that density is really important to helping entrepreneurs put down roots. Because the difference for Arch Grants versus most of the other players in town is that I don't really care if your business succeeds or dies, right? I care about it because you care about it, but I'm not going to get rich if your company, right? We're a nonprofit functioning in a space very different than most of our peer organizations, and that's intentional. And it's not to diminish the importance of that business being successful, but it means that we start instead with the quality of the people. What's their experience going to be like in St. Louis? And the density piece factors heavily into the experience for that individual or that team, because they have to make personal connections as well as the professional. And if they can't make personal connections in a meaningful way in St. Louis, it doesn't matter whether or not we can make professional connections for them, because ultimately they want to be in a place that feels familiar and comfortable and a place that they want to be. So for us, the density piece is huge, and the variety of flavors that Phyllis alluded to makes our job easier, because now we have a portfolio of options for companies versus what existed when the competition launched in 2012. And T-Rex and Cortex and Helix, they're all important options on that menu.
Anybody else with regard to density?
I would just add, so my background, because I love this subject, kind of crazy about it, but So my background is as an urban theorist and a policy analyst. That's my graduate work was in that area. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Jane Jacobs, but she's a great urban theorist. And one of the things she wrote about in the 60s is where innovation really happens is where density exists and many different kinds of people, diversity being important, many different kinds of people in many different fields are running into one another all the time. And those edges are where innovation happens. And Travis talks about that a lot, actually, in your newsletter and all of your communications. And so you have to, I don't know. I mean, a million people are giving you advice all day, right? I mean, you gotta find a place that feels comfortable for you, that costs the right amount for you, and where you're going to find those intersections that are going to help you with your startup.
So I see people moving into more space than they often need sometimes, right? When they finally leave their home, they want a nice big corner office, or they'll visit one of Mark's incubators at VentureWorks, and they'll try to pick out the biggest one because sometimes the price point is so attractive that you can spend just as much money and get a really big office. But then you don't have that same density. Maybe co-working might be a better place for you, not a private office. This is a strange question, but I like to ask it. What size is the right size? Is this a Goldilocks situation where it's either too soft, too hard, or just right? How do you know what the right fit is when you're trying to pick out? And Ginger mentioned when you walk in, it feels right. But are there anything that people could think about when they're looking at the type of office they want to go into?
I always go. I mean, every time I talk to new clients that are coming in, it's kind of one of those factors of really kind of finding out what everything they're going to be in an office. I mean, if it's from a food manufacturing company. Is it, we have a shared kitchen space down in Grand Center, so, I mean, some companies come in thinking that they're going to need to hold their own kitchen in their own space. Well, I mean, because we have that shared kitchen, their offices can be, much smaller. And really, they don't need, they just need to be able to work with the other companies that are in the building itself to really kind of understand the time slots and figure that out. So between that or some of our other facilities that have warehousing, I mean, there's some companies that come in and they say, hey, I want the biggest spots, as you said. But when it comes down to reality of what equipment they might have or what needs they really do need, and just kind of sitting down and really kind of figuring out with them. A lot of times it's usually, they understand very quickly that, they'll start off with a smaller space, that eventually we can move them into a larger space if need be. So.
I think that flexibility piece is key. I have a background in commercial real estate as well, and I like to say that in St. Louis, we have a really generous sense of personal space. And we're all used to our desk and our credenza and our seating area and all this space, and especially if someone's coming from a more traditional corporate setting into one of these co-working spaces, it's a really different feel. And sometimes it takes being in that environment and dropping in and talking to people to really understand how they're using their space and that they're using it differently. Your workspace is different than the shared conference rooms or some of the public spaces. And I think that's so important. It's a big shift in your mindset about how you want to use your space. And when you can start to tie that to efficiency in your budget and how you use your space, that usually starts to follow really quickly. So.
I would just add, we're kind of like space Nazis at T-Rex because the space is subsidized. It's nonprofit. I raise money, to make this thing work. And so you can't just take up as much office space as you want. It's precious space. So we actually have offices kind of mapped out about how many people it will fit. And we will guide you to, if you have 2 people and you're coming in and you need an office, we guide you to 2-person offices. And then if you need more, then you have to talk us into that. Because we're flexible, but at the same time, we feel a great commitment to the community. And our goal is to get people out of T-Rex. We are not a real estate play. We are trying to graduate as many companies as we can. So by creating that density and by paying attention to best using the space, we think we're providing the right benefit to the community. So everybody's a little bit different in the way that they manage their space.
Well, the title of this panel is Putting Local Resources Together. I want to ask you each to talk about how you make resources available. And let's exclude financial resources. We've talked a little bit about the space resources, but what about the talent resources? How do you, when people interact with your different organizations, how does talent come together? Either from an employment standpoint, they're hiring people that they might be able to work with, or a collaboration standpoint. How does talent really collide in your spaces or your organizations?
So with our cohorts, we're obviously restricted to generally providing service to those whom we are funding. So even if we take the funding out, just keep in mind that we're supporting up to around 20 to 24 companies in any given 12-month period, plus any companies that we have funded previously that remain in St. Louis. The only time I restrict how we support our companies is if a company leaves St. Louis, and then we're not generally making referrals and helping them source talent.
You're dead to me, right?
Not dead to me, just I have to be efficient with my services. Right? So
When they come back.
when they come back, I welcome you with open arms. No judgment, no judgment. Because we're a global organization, as I remind my board, global means they're not always here all the time. But one of the things that we do with regard to talent in a college town, is we try to make the best use we can of the relationships we have within each of the colleges and universities, especially those that have dedicated schools of entrepreneurship. And obviously that's inclusive of Washington University and St. Louis University, but it's also inclusive of Lindenwood and UMSL and Harris Stowe and other institutions. We keep a resume book on file. And then we can encourage those who are seeking talent to be talking to other people who are seeking talent. And to the extent that we can compel some of our partners, Venture Cafe, maybe having some sort of session on one of their Thursday nights, and it could be around talent recruitment and retention. And that might be a place where we would choose to request an opportunity to collaborate. And the same could be said of Patty and the programming that they offer at T-Rex. And so there's just lots of opportunities, so long as we're communicating with one another and being thoughtful about how we reach out to our peers in leadership positions within these institutions. How are we then coordinating a continuum of service for people? And for the Arch Grants recipients, it's generally talent, capital, space, and then the personal. Dating in St. Louis. It's illegal for me to help my people date. However, I can certainly put them in environments where I can reduce the number of barriers to meeting other people who are single. So, there are lots of things that we can do as a community with humor and grace to help our folks connect with one another and do it both personally and professionally, but always with the primary goal being to make these people feel happy and safe and excited about calling St. Louis home.
Anybody else? Talent or
Talent, I would say from a talent standpoint, because the majority of my businesses that are in our incubators outside of the Helix Center are really two small businesses, and they're not going to ever be the bigger, growing, multinational companies or even 200 or 300 person firms. We actually use the SLATE program quite often, which is an educational program here in St. Louis, and it works well because especially a lot of our clients or our companies just need small part-time help or at first, but then grow into it. So it's a great resource to use. Which I think other ways we use it is other ways we use employment-wise is Accelerate St. Louis. There's a website that we can post you can post your jobs on that, and actually there's a pretty good draw of talent that comes through there as well for our smaller companies.
So the websites, Accelerate St. Louis, I-10 has job postings, Cortex has job postings. There's a lot of the spaces that have those. Hopefully there'll be a few more out there as well coming soon. In Cortex, how many people have been to Venture Cafe? Cool, there's a few more than one. That's good. I'll take Travis's phrase of serendipitous collisions, but so much of our programming is tied to putting different people in the place so they can intersect, and people with different backgrounds and from different industries have a chance to interact. We do a lot as well with the universities and from across the region. So we're giving the entrepreneurship educators a chance to talk. Each month we have about 12 universities that meet so that they can share their programming and we can talk about ways to get their students engaged. We have a summer intern program that we help a little bit with the placement, but whenever the interns show up for the summer, we do an orientation program both to Cortex but to the innovation community, because we want that talent to stay here, not just for a summer, but hopefully long term. And the more we can do tours, I know T-Rex does a million tours as well. Cortex does a ton of tours. The more we can expose our students and recent graduates, and students is probably from middle school on, but at the high school and the college level, if they know that this innovation community is a possibility for them, that's a big step forward, because right now most of them don't know that this exists. And so the more that we can raise that awareness is huge.
Anybody else want to add something to talent? Okay.
Amen to all that.
Amen.
Yeah.
So as one of our last questions here before we open it up to the audience, I would be remiss if I didn't mention corporate engagement as a resource that's vital to all the organizations that are on this table. To this event, as an example, with Monsanto being the primary sponsor of this event, how have you seen corporates, especially this evolution of the ecosystem, the community, how have you seen corporates make themselves available to the startup community?
Can I start with that one?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm looking at Ryan because he's with Monsanto Growth Ventures, and I'm going to use Monsanto as Exhibit A, and not simply because they are a major underwriter, but because they are truly leading by example. So what's happened recently in our market, fairly recently, is the growth of venture capital out of our corporate entities. And so when you think about corporate engagement, it used to be perhaps it was philanthropic dollars coming out of their foundation, or it was money perhaps coming out of a marketing budget, which could be separate and apart from their philanthropic dollars. Now there's also the venture capital components of the corporations. And as a result, with these three avenues for capital coming out of the companies into the community, they are choosing to engage in the startup community through one or more of those channels. And it's extremely helpful to us. Philanthropically, T-Rex and Arch Grants are both nonprofits. So we're fundraising. We are both public-private partnerships. We're fundraising for 100% of our operating budget every year, including the grants, because we don't have a recurring revenue source or a fee-for-service. So as a result, when Monsanto is an underwriter of Arch Grants, that's a huge help to us financially, but it's also validation that our work in the community is worth funding, and that's a means of its own kind of tool that I can use to compel other corporations to give. And then the corporations are curious about the companies, right? So then we have the advantage of working with like Ryan and John McLean at Monsanto, who say, all right, well, what kind of talent do you have in your portfolio right now? Can we get some flavor of that talent and see if there are any synergies perhaps with things going on within Monsanto? And could we then meet with those entrepreneurs to get a better sense of where there might be opportunities for collaboration? And then, because they're so thoughtful, and they recognize that this is an opportunity for St. Louis to really fundamentally shift how we think about early stage business development, then they're looking outside of Monsanto and trying to figure out, well, who are our corporate peers in the community, and what could we do collaboratively as peer organizations in the corporate community to be more impactful within our startups, either through partnership with the entrepreneurs, through funding relationships with the nonprofits doing the best work. You know, what is it that we could be doing as a corporate community to really, really help this take root? Because bio is where this started for St. Louis. Some might say it was, you know, the fur trade, and I would agree, and the beer barons, right? Entrepreneurship founded St. Louis. But when you think about what we're talking about in modern parlance, it started with bio. It started with bio. And so bio has had a 15-year run on tech. What bio has achieved is the foundation off of which Patty and I and CIC and everybody are trying to build to continue to diversify our regional economy through the inclusion of tech. And we are so really grateful to I call them our brethren in bio, because they have been in this space seeding this type of culture for a long time. So the corporate community could not play a more important role. And I think the piece that we're missing, that I hope to see more of in the near future, are the privately held, closely held family businesses that also could be so much of an accelerant in our community relative to our startup community. And I'm very excited to be meeting with more of those groups now and seeing the appetite that they too have to get involved through doing business, doing beta tests, having contracts, or being philanthropically engaged.
Phyllis, corporate engagement?
Amen. First of all, in Cortex, we really encourage a whole range of companies to be in the district because of all those reasons that Ginger just mentioned. You want that interaction between the startups and the corporate so that there's an exchange of ideas. corporate R&D budgets are not what they used to be, and they have to look for ideas that have been vetted a little more fully than a corporation developing something completely in-house. We also see our corporations doing a little bit more of a push of ideas, as well as the pull of ideas. And that is companies like Boeing that will come to Venture Cafe and spend an hour and a half sharing technologies that they have, that they're looking for different opportunities in different industries. That's pretty cool to be able to sit and look into Boeing's, toy box for an hour and a half, and to see what all they're trying to commercialize in different ways. We have a lot of activities like that. I think we also are looking for new ways and additional ways just to create those collisions again. Sometimes the corporations are not sure what to think about the whole startup culture, and finding ways for corporations and startups to live together. We have examples like Capital Innovators is a client in the Cortex District, and they've partnered with Merits so that their cohorts that are coming in, that they're investing in, get time with the Merits employees that relate to their technologies. Merits, of course, gets a first view at some of these technologies that could enhance their services. But then it's just a whole different way for the project teams from Merits to get a chance to come into this ecosystem as well.
Mark and Patty?
I'd say with the St. Louis Challenge, Startup Challenge, as well as the St. Louis Export Challenge and the Global Initiatives export plan that we're coming up with, we've gotten huge companies that are basically donating money for no strings attached award prizes to companies. And with that, you also get the top tier services from these companies of wanting to work with these smaller companies, these startups. It's a great way of blending the larger corporations in with the startups. We also have through the Accelerate St. Louis, we do the CEO to CEO, which is you take a small startup CEO and you pair them up with a large CEO of a company. We did one not too long ago with Maxine Clark of Build-A-Bear, and we paired it up with John Beckham of, I can't think of her company offhand, I'm blanking on it. Clothing company, thank you. But we basically sat down, we did an hour-long kind of Q&A of where the big CEO learns from the little CEO, and the little CEO learns from the big CEO. It's a great event. We've done 3 of those now. We're looking at doing more in the future. We're growing and growing with that. I'd say in addition to that, I had one other thing. Oh, in addition to that, something else I'm working on just from the VentureWorks standpoint, it's something kind of a new idea that we're working on, is kind of doing a homecoming. So St. Louis VentureWorks has been around for so long, has been around for 20 plus years. We're actually reaching out to our former graduates and companies that have been successful and are still successful, and bringing them back for a kind of a week-long lunch seminar to each center that they graduated from, in order for them to have them meet with the new startups. And it's a way of blending the community together. So maybe it's not a big major corporation, but these are companies that have been successful and have graduated from our centers. It's a great way to just get them to start, having the smaller startup companies, network and grow with the companies itself.
And Patty?
The only thing I would add to what's already been said is this idea of finding real hands-on work to accomplish together small companies and large corporations. And one of the greatest examples, I think, is 630, which is a financial technology accelerator in St. Louis. And I didn't know this till I took this job, but St. Louis is second only to New York in the number of financial services firms that have businesses here. And so it's a great market for startups focused on financial technology. So there's a real opportunity for small firms to learn from from big companies, and also a market for the products that are developed. So there's a lot of interchange in that area, and then that's even growing with cybersecurity right now. So we have money. I applied for a grant from the state and just got money to help grow a cybersecurity economic cluster in St. Louis with the partnership of 630, many other partners in the area, but also an organization called Security Advisor Alliance, which is comprised of the chief security officers of all the major corporations in St. Louis. So some of the things that we all want to work on together is talent development in cybersecurity, as well as in product development, and just sharing information. So those are the kinds of hands-on things that really take this, further along. Oh, you're doing that to me? What?
We have a clock up there just in case you guys can't read the bright red letters.
I understand,
All
but
right.
I understand. I just want to point out, the clock started late. The clock did start late. Yeah.
They put this crazy schedule to squeeze as much as we can.
I'm putting local time resources together. Do we have time for an audience question?
Absolutely.
Great,
I
I want-
don't know
yeah.
about you, but I got at least 3 golden nuggets out of this talent pool. There are resources here. Ned,
Question in the back there.
So you all
stand up, Ned.
You all talked about graduating. So companies move from each of your various things into the real world. How does that happen? How do you help it happen? Does a company move from T-Rex to Cortex, or how do we all cooperate to make sure this company just stay in the St. Louis region once they graduate from your various systems?
That's a great question.
Do one or two you want to take that quickly? We'll do quick answers.
The scenario you just described happens, yes. We've had companies go from Arch Grants inside T-Rex to Cortex, theoretically, mostly CIC. How do we all work together to make that happen? If you are a broker, if you own property, call me.
Yeah.
I generally like to vet the brokers with whom I work to send my entrepreneurs, because a lousy broker will blow this for me. So I pre-vet the brokers with my staff, and if I don't like you, you don't get business. Because I can't deal with people who are racist, and I can't deal with people who are sexist. So so just to put it all out there, I don't like what I don't like, and therefore they don't get referrals.
And that's the way business works. Anybody else want to take a quick stab at that? How do you see these companies working together as you're graduating your clients out?
In Cortex, we are not as focused on necessarily graduating out within a certain time frame, and the district is really meant to be a place where companies can grow and move from month-to-month space to more permanent locations and larger size spaces. That's something we're building out right now and starting additional buildings to accommodate that. So there's certainly a play within the community, moving between buildings, or staying in one location and continuing.
I just want to add to Ginger's.
Yes, Pat.
No, wait. I would just want to add to Ginger's thing
Yes.
that I also don't like brokers who never show property in the city, and that happens, and that's
Agreed.
not fair.
Agreed.
So,
Shame on them.
yeah.
All right, one more question.
Quick, one question.
Who wants it?
First person. Right
Yes.
there.
No, for me, it's more of a statement. I think all of you are proven. I would like to see private ownership in St. Louis as well as corporate St. Louis. Look at your mission as important as Washington University, St. Louis University, and give you significant endowments to take the pressure off fundraising.
I love
Yes,
you.
that's a great closing comment
Yay.
right there.